Welcome back to the Docker command line options section of the Getting Started with Docker course. In this lesson, we're covering the Docker build command. So let's open up the console here. And what I'm going to do in this section, I'm going to illustrate all these different points by actually showing you a command line that we're going to run. Okay, so let's start with Docker build. Now let's first look at our images. So Docker images. We actually have a blank one here. Not even sure that is. So what I'm going to do is say Docker remove image EO7. Remember that removes the image that starts with EO7. And since there's only one, it can do that. And it says conflict must be forced. Image is being used by a stopped container. But I don't believe I have any containers. Let's look. Docker ps-a. And I do have a container. That's interesting. I didn't know that I did. Well, let's remove Docker remove. And these are all created, but they're just created, not running. So Docker remove, and we can do our $ Docker ps-a-q, which will remove all of the images off my machine. I'm sorry, all the containers off my machine. And there we go, removed all four. So Docker ps-a, no containers. Now I can do a clear the screen, Docker images, and then do Docker RMI EO7. And that removes it. Now I have just those three. And so you'll do that cleanup sometimes when you find, hey, I've got this stuff here that I'm not using, but it's still hanging around. So that cleaned it up for me. So now we have just these three images, but we want to create an image from our Docker file from before. So let's bring the Explorer onto the screen here. And remember this HTML file, index.html? But I used to have Docker file, the file, Docker file, in this Docker folder. But I've moved it up one level. Now it's here instead. But it's still the same file. If I were to open it, it still says, sets the working directory up, exposes the two ports, or it says to expose those two ports, and it copies from ./HTML/. The only problem is that there is no HTML folder where this Docker file lives. It's actually one level deeper in here. So we're going to tackle that as part of our build process just to see how to do it, since we've seen how to do it the normal way, or the easy way, which is where the Docker file lives in the root of your folder you're working with. So let's close this out. So what we're going to do is let's clear the screen and say Docker, and we'll start the build command, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to build a container we're going to build an image from our Docker file. So we're going to create a new image for that image list. So Docker build, and the first command we have is the -f command. And this -f allows us to specify a new path for that Docker file. So notice that I am on c:/temp/docker. But I want to point the Docker file to c:/temp/docker file. That's where the Docker file lives, which is one level higher than where I'm at right here. So this is a way to point to a Docker file that's not in your root directory. It's somewhere else. Now, since I'm running in this directory, it's going to treat this directory as the root still. So remember that ./HTML? That will work because we're in the working directory, the base directory of ctemp docker. So even though the Docker file is somewhere else, it's going to use the root working directory as its root working directory, which is, in this case, ctemp docker. So that allows me to point to a file location other than in this root. So that's one. But we're going to do a complete command here, so with more than one option here. Some of these you might not ever use, but I wanted to at least see them. So the next one is one that we saw in Visual Studio. It used, but you may or may not need it. It's up to you. But it's a dash label. And you do a space, and let's just say Tim's image. Gotta get those terms right. So this attaches a message onto the metadata of your image. And it's just a way to put information on the image. It doesn't affect anything else. It's a visual thing. So you can tag it with information about your company. You can tag it with how it was built, like Visual Studio does. Or you can just, tag it with Tim's image, because why not? So that's a label, and you can have multiple of those. So I can do another label with, I can do a label like that, and then say, built for IamTimCorey.com. Okay? And that will work. So you have two labels. And you can have multiple. And it's just for metadata. It's just for information about the image. All right, next up is the -Q, single dash and Q. And what this does is it suppresses the build output. Normally you see how the build is working, and it shows you the different steps. But with -Q, you suppress all of that, and you just get back the image ID if it is successfully built. So that's all you get back. So we're going to see that. We'll probably do it a couple times so you can see one with it on versus one with it off. But -Q does suppress those messages. The next one up is the -RM. And what this does is it removes intermediate images. So when you build an image, remember that it creates intermediate images and then it creates a final image. We have steps to go through, like in Visual Studio we saw that it created like 4 different containers eventually, and then it got rid of the other ones. This -RM is how. By default, it's on, meaning it removes those intermediate steps, those intermediate images, once it gets the final image. But if you wanted to suppress that, you would say equals false. And actually that's double dash, sorry. -RM equals false. By default, it's true, so you don't need to include it. All right, so far we've changed where the file is located. That you might use once in a while. Typically, the Docker file is in the root of your project, but maybe it's not. We've added labels, which are just metadata, and whether you use them or not is up to you. We have silenced the chatty build process telling you what's happening, and whether you use that or not depends really on whether or not you're scripting this, because typically I like to see what's going on. But if you're scripting it, you may want to get just that ID back so you can grab that value in your script and do something else with it. And then the -RM, typically you want this to be true because you don't want those intermediate images clogging up your system. But there may be a case for if you want to debug something, why it's not working quite right. You can look at each intermediate image to see what happened and why it was that way. What went wrong essentially. Now this next command is something you're going to use a lot, and that's -T for tagging. So when you tag something, you give it a name. So this image doesn't have a name yet. We're going to give it a name. So let's call it new-image. Horrible name. But we're going to give it that name. And I'm going to say that this is the latest build. But maybe you want to also give it a numeric value. And that's where you can do -T again. It kind of wrapped off a screen there. So let's see if we can't. There we go. So there. So now we have another dash T, and that is going to tag it again. So we can say new dash image 1.0.0. So what this allows you to do is to have all your different versions, and then you can remove a tag from the previous one that says latest and apply it to a new image that says latest. So that's how you have this tagged more than once. But here's the thing that people often miss. I can say dash T multiple times, tag it multiple ways, but that also means I can name it something else as well. Hello dash world latest as well. So normally they're called new image, new dash image, and we have latest and 1.0.0, but we can also have hello dash world as the image name and it be latest. So you can name it multiple different ways or tag it multiple different ways when you're building it. All right. And the last thing to remember is, and this one, I often forget this one, is make sure you actually hit the dot at the end, and that specifies the location where that root directory is. Now, like I said, because I hit dot here, I'm saying C temp docker, but I could give it a different path if I wanted to. It would use that path instead. So I could have my Docker file located in one path, and I could have my build located in a different path, or my root directory located in a different path, even though I'm on a third path. So you can really make this confusing if you wanted to. I try and keep it as simple as possible. This build statement is way more complicated than I normally do. Normally I have Docker build. The Docker file is already in the right location, so I don't need that. I don't usually label things. I don't suppress the messaging. I don't suppress the deletion of the intermediate images. And I usually only tag once, so that it really cuts down your command. But these options are available to you. I wanted to show you the major ones that you might want. So let's run this. And once it runs, you'll see it give us back just the ID of the image. Okay, that's it. So it's 6612. So if we go to Docker images, we can see 6612. But notice 6612 and 6612. Why is that? Well, because I have three different combination of name and tag. So hello dash world and latest, and then I have new image 1.0.0 and new image latest. And what does that mean for me? Well, what I can do is, let's say we're going to build the next version 1.0.1, which means that this new image is no longer, actually this one down here, is no longer the latest. The next one's going to be. Well, I can do docker remove image new dash image colon latest. And it untags it. That's all it does. Because that image is still being used by two other image names or image tags, essentially. So now if I do docker images, you'll see I have just these two that share the image ID. Okay, so now I can create, let's just clear a screen. I can do a Docker build again. Let's not make it quite so verbose. So let's do what I would typically do, which is Docker build. I do have to do the -f because it's in a different location. So C:/temp/Docker file. And I'm going to do a -t for new -image latest and a -t for new -image :1.0.1. I'm going to tag it twice. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to delete the intermediate. I'm not going to stop the deletion of the intermediate images. So they are going to get removed. and I am not going to suppress the build output. So I hit dot here, hit enter. There's that build output, the 5 steps we're doing. And now if I clear the screen and I do Docker images, I now have new image 1.0, new image 1.1. And notice that now new image 1.1 and new image latest share the same image ID. Okay, so that's how we use the Docker build command. In our next video, we'll look at how to use the Docker run command and the different options we have there as well. So stick around for that.